The terrace was strung with lanterns the color of butter, and 200 people had come to be seen under them. Silas Bennett had only stopped to help a waiter whose tray had gone crooked, catching a champagne flute before it could roll, and he was standing there with a pitcher of ice water in his free hand when Roland Pierce found him. The gardener does not belong at the donor table. Roland set it the way some men set down a glass, loud and final, so that 3 nearby tables went quiet at once. He lifted one manicured hand and pointed toward the dark gap in the hedge where the service path began. "Side path, please. Tonight is important." Silas nodded. He was a tall man with sun on the back of his neck and a line of dirt he could never quite scrub out from under one thumbnail, and he had learned a long time ago that a nod cost nothing and kept the evening whole. He set the pitcher on the low stone wall, careful, so the water only shivered and did not spill. He turned to go. An older couple caught his sleeve before he could. They had toured the gardens an hour earlier, before the speeches, and they had the flushed, delighted look of people who had found the best part of a party by accident. "There he is," the woman said, beaming. "The man who showed us the reflecting terrace. My dear, we have decided you are the most interesting person at this entire event." She glanced past him, teasing, at the glittering crowd. "So, who is the lucky woman on your arm tonight? A man who talks about roses the way you do does not come to a thing like this alone." Silas opened his mouth. He was not sure what he would have said. Something small and kind and untrue, probably. Something to move the moment gently along and let him slip out through the hedge to where he belonged. He never got to say it. Heels crossed the flagstone behind him, unhurried, and the whole terrace seemed to turn at once, the way a field turns when the wind changes direction. Helena Fairbanks, chief executive of the foundation, the woman every guest had spent the evening trying to reach for 90 seconds of her attention, walked straight through the gap the crowd made for her. She stopped at Silas's side. She slipped her hand into his as if she had done it 1,000 times. "You're looking at her," she said. "Before you decide what kind of woman would say that in front of 200 people, stay with this one until the end. Some answers grow slower than you think, and this one had been 4 years in the ground before it ever reached the light. Because 4 years earlier there had been no terrace and no lanterns, only a man on his knees in the dirt with a sleeping 2-year-old in a wagon beside him, and a garden that not one living person knew he had made. The mornings came gray and cool that spring, and Silas loved them best. He would let himself and Willa in through the east gate before the estate woke, before the caterers and the tour buses and the wedding planners arrived, and for 1 hour the gardens belonged to the 2 of them and no one else. Willa was 7 now, all knees and questions, and she walked the gravel paths with the serious air of an inspector who suspected the flowers of hiding something. "That one's a dragon snap," she announced, pointing at a spike of coral flowers. "Close," Silas said. "Snapdragon. The dragons come later, once you know them well enough." "When do the dragons come?" "When you stop expecting them." She considered this with a frown that was entirely her mother's, then ran ahead to check on the koi, who she was convinced recognized her. Silas watched her go and felt the old ache turn over once and settle, the way it always did, like a dog circling and finding its place by the fire. He worked while she played. He deadheaded the roses along the long border, and pinched back the salvia and knelt to check the drip lines for the split he had been chasing all week. His hands knew the work without asking his mind, and that was the mercy of it. A garden did not want speeches. It did not want a man's whole grief poured out over it. It wanted attention, patient and daily and unglamorous, and it gave back exactly what it was given, no more and no less. Silas had found, in the 4 years since his wife died, that this was the only kind of arithmetic he still trusted completely. August Reyes came up the path around 7, thermos in hand, and dropped onto the edge of the fountain to watch Silas work in the way that younger men mistake for helping. August was 29, quick with a joke, and he had appointed himself Silas's apprentice without ever formally asking. "You know they pay us the same whether you fix that line at 7 or 9, August said. "They pay us the same whether the garden lives or dies too," Silas said. "That is not the point of it. See, that is exactly the kind of thing that is going to get you canonized and broke." August grinned and unscrewed his thermos. "What are you and the small terror doing this weekend?" "Pancakes, then the hardware store." She thinks the hardware store is an amusement park. She is not wrong. August capped his thermos and grew, for a moment, unusually serious. "You hear the talk from the office? The new man, Pierce. They say he wants to build something out here, something with a roof and a parking lot." He shook his head. "People like that look at a place like this and see a spreadsheet with grass on it." "People like that have always been around," Silas said. "The garden was here before them. It tends to outlast them." "Maybe?" August did not look convinced. "But the garden doesn't get a vote, does it? Somebody has to speak for it." Silas did not answer that. He fitted a new coupling onto the split line and opened the valve and watched the water find its way. And he told himself, as he had told himself for 4 years, that speaking was not the same as tending, and that tending was the thing he was good at. Inside the tool shed, taped to the back of the door where only Silas ever saw it, was a drawing in green crayon. A stick man with enormous hands stood among flowers taller than he was. Underneath, in Willa's careful uneven letters, it said, "Daddy's Garden." She had made it when she was 5, and he had never once told her how close the little drawing came to the actual truth. He locked the shed at 10 to 8 and walked her to school, her hand in his, and to everyone who passed them the gardens they left behind looked like something that had simply always been there. That was how Silas wanted it. It was easier to tend a thing quietly than to stand up and claim it. He had not always been a man who tended other people's gardens. Once, when he was young and hungry and certain the world was standing on its porch waiting for him, he had drawn gardens for a living. He had joined a small design firm at 22, 3 people, and a drafting table, and a coffee machine that only worked if you struck it once on the left side, and he had been good at the work. Better than good. He had a way of seeing how a piece of ground wanted to be walked, where a person would naturally want to stop, and where they would want to keep moving, and he could set that down on paper so plainly that a builder could make it real without a single argument. When he was 27, the firm won the commission to redesign the estate's south gardens. Silas drew the long border and the reflecting terrace over one long winter, filling 3 sketchbooks, and he built them the following spring. Standing in the mud in his good boots, learning the hard way that the distance between a drawing and a garden is 1,000 small decisions no drawing can ever hold. It was the finest thing he had ever made. He finished it the same season the firm quietly came apart, the 3 of them shaking hands in an emptied office, the drafting table sold to a stranger for $40. By the time anyone thought to ask whose idea the reflecting terrace had been, there was no letterhead left to answer the question, and Silas had already moved on to the next job, and then to Lydia, and then to a life so full and so loud with happiness that he stopped needing his name printed on anything at all. He had met Lydia at a botanical garden the year before the estate job. She was a pediatric nurse who came on her days off to sit by the water lilies because, she said, they were the only living thing in the whole city that flatly refused to hurry. He had watched her for 3 Saturdays before he found the nerve to bring her a coffee. They married 2 years later in a courthouse and celebrated in the same botanical garden, standing by the lilies. They were happy in the ordinary, enormous way that does not make a story worth telling until the day it ends. Willa came when Silas was 30, red-faced and furious. And for 2 years the three of them were a small, closed circle of light that Silas believed nothing could ever get inside. Then Lydia got sick, and the year that followed took everything a single year can take from a family. She died when Willa was 2, in the spring, with the bedroom window cracked open, because she had asked for air that smelled green instead of clean. Silas did not draw a garden for anyone after that. He could not sit at a table and imagine beauty for strangers, not when the imagining had gone out of him. What he could still do was work with his hands until his body was tired enough to let him sleep. And so, when the estate needed a new head gardener the following year, he took the humble job without hesitation. People who remembered him thought it a strange step down for a man who had once had a real future in front of him. What they did not know was that the South Gardens were his. He had chosen the one place on earth where he could keep living beside something he had made while she was still alive, and tended every single day, and never once have to explain to anyone why his eyes stung in the second week of April, when the first spring snapdragons broke open. He told no one the garden was his, not the board, not the staff, not August, not even Willa. It was not exactly a secret he was keeping. It was a grief he was protecting, and from the outside the two things can look identical. The woman started coming to the garden the winter Willa turned 6. Silas noticed her before he had any idea who she was, the way a man notices a change in the weather. She came early in a good wool coat that did not suit the gravel, and she sat on the bench at the far end of the long border with a paper cup of coffee going cold in her hands and a phone she never once looked at. She did not walk the paths or read the little plant markers. She just sat, upright and still, as if the garden were a quiet room she had been let into and did not wish to disturb by moving. One frozen morning he carried a second coffee out without quite deciding to. He set it on the bench beside her, a respectful distance away, said nothing, and went back to pruning the espaliered pears along the south wall. "You are the only person here who does not want something from me," she said, after a long while. She said it to the garden, not to him. "I want you to try the coffee before it goes cold," Silas said, without turning around. "That is the whole of my agenda this morning." She laughed, startled out of herself, and drank it. That was the beginning of it. He learned, slowly, across a whole season of cold mornings, that her name was Helena Fairbanks, and that she ran the Children's Hospital Foundation that leased the estate every June for its enormous gala. He learned that she had taken the job 3 years ago to fix a place that badly needed fixing, and that the fixing had quietly cost her most of the version of herself she used to actually like. She did not tell him any of this in a rush. She told it in pieces, over pears and roses, and the kind of small talk that is not small at all, the way people finally tell the truth once they have privately decided the listener is safe to tell it to. "Everyone I meet has already priced me," she said one morning, her breath clouding. "Before I sit down, they know what I can give and what I can approve, and the whole conversation is just them reaching for it politely. You have never once done that." "I don't know what you can approve," Silas said. "I know you take your coffee too hot and you sit like your back hurts. That is the extent of my file on you." "My back does hurt," she admitted, and almost smiled. There was a morning in early March when she came out and did not sit down at all. She stood at the head of the border with her arms wrapped around herself and her coffee untouched, and Silas could see, even from the pear wall, that something in her had gone thin and close to the edge. He did not ask what was wrong. He walked over and stood beside her, not too near, and looked at the same bare bed she was looking at. "They want me to cut the family support program," she said finally. "The one that pays for parents to sleep near their sick children. It does not generate anything, they tell me. It only helps people." She laughed, but there was no laugh in it. "I have spent 3 years learning to speak a language where the word only goes in front of helping people." "You have not learned it," Silas said. "You just know where it is spoken. That is not the same as speaking it." She looked at him for a long moment, and something in her face steadied, the way a level bubble settles when the ground finally comes true. "How do you always know the right thing to say to me?" "I don't," Silas said. "I only say the small amount I am sure of. It leaves less room to be wrong." She drank her coffee after that. She kept the program. He never heard about it again, and he never asked, but he noticed that she came out to the bench more often after that morning, not less. He did not tell her much about himself in return, and she was careful enough, or kind enough, not to push. She did not even ask his last name. It never came up, because on that bench he was not a man with a history and a lost career and a wife in the ground. He was simply the person who noticed when she was tired and set a warm cup down where her hand could find it without looking. One morning, Willa came looking for him and found the strange lady on the bench instead, and instead of going shy she climbed straight up beside her and explained, at considerable length, the crucial difference between a dragon snap and a snapdragon. Helena listened to all of it with the grave, full attention she usually reserved for auditors. "She is wonderful," Helena said, when Willa had run off to interrogate the koi. "She is her mother's," Silas said. "I just keep the water on." Helena looked at him then, a question forming behind her eyes, but she let it go unasked, and Silas was grateful, and did not know yet that gratitude was already turning into something with deeper roots. She left lighter than she had come, every single time. She never asked what he had been before. It never seemed to matter to either of them, until the morning it suddenly, badly did. The trouble arrived in a very good suit, carrying charts. Roland Pierce had come onto the foundation board 2 years earlier, and by that June he had made himself its interim executive while the elderly chair recovered from surgery. He was a man who used the word efficiency the way other men use the name of God, with a kind of automatic reverence that ended every conversation before it could turn into a discussion. He looked at the estate and did not see a garden that had made the foundation famous. He saw underused acreage sitting on a balance sheet. His plan was a pavilion. A glass and steel event space where the long border now stood, rentable year-round, weddings and conferences and product launches, a revenue engine to replace what he called in-meetings, the foundation's dangerous and sentimental dependence on one gala a year. He presented it to the board with renderings that glowed like jewelry. He needed only one more thing to make it real, and that thing was a gala so dazzling that the donors would follow him anywhere he pointed, even straight over the roses. "Nostalgia does not fund a children's ward," Roland told the boardroom, clicking briskly to the next glowing slide. "Concrete does. Recurring revenue does. I am asking every person at this table to be a serious adult about the numbers." Helena fought him in every meeting. She lost ground in every meeting. Roland had the numbers on his side, and numbers are loud, and grief is quiet, and a garden has never once been able to stand up and speak for itself. "People do not drive 90 minutes for a conference center," Helena said. "They drive for the garden. The garden is the whole reason the giving doubled. Then we will have taken the most valuable thing on the property," Roland answered smoothly, and finally made it pay. 3 days before the gala, the order came down through Bess Turner, the events coordinator, who found Silas by the compost bins with her clipboard held flat against her chest like a small shield. Bess was a careful, quick woman who laughed easily in ordinary times, and she was not laughing now. "I have to ask you to stay out of sight on Saturday night," she said. her eyes fixed somewhere over his left shoulder. The donors. Mr. Pierce feels that the ground staff should not be visible during the event itself. "I understand," Silas said. "It isn't me." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "I have 2 kids and a lease, and he is the one who signs my schedule. Please don't make this harder than it already is for me." "I'm not going to make anything hard, Bess," Silas said, as gently as he knew how. "Go on, it's all right, truly." She went, fast, and did not look back, and Silas stood there in the good, clean smell of turned earth, and let the stone of it settle slowly into his chest. He had been made invisible before, by grief, by circumstance, by his own quiet choosing. It did not sting any less for being so familiar to him. That night, after Willa was asleep with the hall light on the way she liked it, Silas took a cardboard box down from the top shelf of the shed. Inside were the drawings, the plans for the south gardens from 10 years before, rolled and held with a perished rubber band that snapped at his touch, the paper gone soft and furred at the edges. He unrolled the top sheet on the workbench under the single bare bulb and looked at the long border rendered in his own younger hand, every bed labeled, every sight line measured and marked, and there in the bottom corner, in pencil that had somehow refused to fade, his own signature and the date beside it. He was not going to wave the drawings at anyone. He knew that much about himself with total certainty. He did not want a scene, or a public apology, or a spotlight swung around onto his face. But he found, standing there, that he could not simply let the garden be poured into concrete, while its own honest record slept in a box in the dark. He wanted the drawings to exist in daylight. He wanted the garden to have a witness in case it ever came to need one, even if the only witness in the world was a soft old sheet of paper with a boy's name in the corner. Hollis Pruitt found him there. Hollis had kept the estate's grounds for 40 years and was meant to be retired, though nobody had managed to tell his legs. And he still turned up most evenings to lean on things and openly disapprove of the weather. He looked at the drawing spread on the bench and at the signature in the corner, and then at Silas, and his weathered face did a slow and complicated thing. "I always wondered if it was you," Hollis said quietly, "the way you look at that border. A man does not look at his work the way you look at that border, unless his own 2 hands put it in the ground. It doesn't matter who made it. It will matter on Saturday." Hollis tapped the soft paper with one thick finger. "You let that man pave your wife's garden without saying one word, and you go on calling it humble. But it isn't humble, son. A man can be too humble. Humble is just pride that has learned how to whisper." He straightened up, his joints cracking like green wood. "You don't have to shout at anybody, but be where the light is. That is all I am telling you. Be where the light is on Saturday night, and let the truth find its own way to you." Silas did not answer him. He rolled the drawings carefully back up, but he did not return them to the top shelf. He set them on the workbench, in plain reach of the door, and he turned off the bulb, and he stood a while in the dark, not knowing whether he would ever open them in front of a single living soul. Saturday came warm and gold and windless. By 7, the terrace was full. The lanterns were lit. The string quartet was playing something with a lot of longing in it, and the donors drifted among the beds in their good clothes, exclaiming softly at a garden they believed had grown itself there over the slow, patient years. Silas worked the edges of the evening in a clean-pressed shirt, refilling water pitchers, steadying a table that wobbled on the old stone, invisible by decree and, for most of the night, invisible in simple fact. Then the waiter's tray went crooked, and Silas stepped in without thinking to save the falling glass, and Roland found him standing there with the pitcher in his hand. "The gardener does not belong at the donor table," Roland said, and pointed him off toward the dark. "Side path, please. Tonight is important." Silas set the picture on the wall. He turned to go. The delighted couple caught his sleeve and asked him who the lucky woman was. And then the heels crossed the flagstone, and Helena Fairbanks took his hand in front of 200 people and said, clear as a bell, "You're looking at her." The terrace did not know what to do with itself. For one long suspended second, nobody moved at all. Roland's smile stayed fixed on his face like a picture that had quietly come loose from its hook and had not yet fallen. Helena did not let go of Silas's hand. She turned, entirely unhurried, and let her voice carry the way she had learned over 3 hard years to make it carry in rooms full of louder men. "He is with me," she said. "And since every one of us is standing in it right now, someone ought to finally say it plainly. This man built the reason all of you drove out here tonight. This garden, the long border you have been walking, the reflecting terrace you have been photographing all evening long. He designed every foot of it 10 years ago with his own 2 hands." She looked at Roland then, and her voice did not rise, which was somehow far worse than if it had. "The same garden Mr. Pierce would very much like to pour concrete over by autumn." "That is absurd," Roland said, and a thin note had come into his voice. "The man is ground staff." An old man near the fountain set down his glass. He was thin and stooped and had been quiet all evening, and it turned out he was a retired architect named Whitcomb, who had consulted on the estate's works long ago, before his hands got unsteady. "I know this terrace," Whitcomb said slowly, beginning to walk toward them, his eyes fixed on the reflecting pool as though it were an old friend spotted across a crowded room. "I reviewed these very plans when I was still working. I know whose hand drew them. I have honestly wondered for 10 years where that young man disappeared to." He stopped directly in front of Silas and studied his face for a long moment, and something in the old man visibly eased. "There you are. Good heavens. I thought that firm took your name down into the grave with it." Hollis was there then, at the very edge of the lantern light, silently unrolling a soft old sheet of paper. He did not say a single word. He simply held the drawing up so the warm light fell across the long border rendered in a young man's hand, and the labeled beds, and the signature in the corner, and the date beside it. 200 faces reorganized themselves, slowly, around a man who was still holding a pitcher of water. Silas did not make a speech. He had never in his life wanted one less. He looked at the old drawing in Hollis's hands, and at the garden beyond it going blue in the last of the light, and then at Helena, whose hand was still warm around his. Of all the faces on that terrace, hers was the only one he could quite manage to look at. "You did not have to do that," he said quietly, so that only she could hear it. "I know," she said. "I did it because it was true. I have gotten very tired of things that are only almost true." August pushed through the crowd then, grinning so wide it looked painful, and gripped Silas by the shoulder. "Somebody spoke for the garden after all," he said. "I knew it wouldn't be you." And that, more than the drawings or the architect or the turning of 200 heads, was the thing that finally made Silas's eyes sting. Right there under the butter-colored lanterns, in front of everyone, in the middle of the finest thing he had ever made. The board met the next morning, and the numbers, it turned out, could be made to speak loudly in the other direction too. Helena had spent the small hours of the night with the foundation treasurer and a thick folder. It emerged in the flat, unmusical language of memos and disclosure forms that the contractor Roland had quietly lined up to build his pavilion was a firm in which Roland himself held a large and entirely undisclosed personal interest. The efficiency he had preached from the head of the table for 2 years had a private side door, and his own name was painted on the far side of it. He did not put up much of a fight in the end. Schemers rarely do, once the paper's finally lying on the table in front of everyone. He gathered his charts back into their leather case with the same fastidious care he gave to everything, and at the door he paused and looked back at the silent room as if he still could not entirely believe what was happening to him. "You are all sentimental about weeds," he said. Nobody in the room answered him. There is no useful answer to a man like that, and the silence was answer enough for anyone. He left, and the board voted the pavilion down before his car had even cleared the front gate, and the garden stayed exactly where it had always been. Bess Turner came to Silas that same afternoon, white-faced and braced, to say that she understood completely if he wanted her gone. She had helped to hide him. She would not blame him for a single thing. "I'm not going to ask Helena to fire you, Bess," Silas said. He was coiling a hose as he spoke, and he did not stop coiling it. "You were scared. Scared is not the same thing as cruel, not by a long way. I've been scared myself. It makes you small for a while, and then, if you happen to be lucky, somebody gives you a little room to grow back to your right size." He hung the coiled hose on its hook. "So, go home to your kids. Give Helena a reason to keep you on. That is all anybody ever really needed from me. So it is all I am going to ask back from you." Bess cried, the way people cry when they have braced hard for a blow and been handed grace instead, and Helena kept her on, and in time she laughed easily again. It cost Silas something, all of it, more than he let on. He had kept the garden as a private grief for 4 whole years, a thing that belonged to him and to Lydia, and to no one else in the world. And now it was a story that strangers told each other, a name on a small brass plaque the foundation insisted on setting at the head of the long border. He minded that more than he had expected to. Being proven right had never once been the thing he actually wanted, but there was this, and it was worth all the rest. One evening at dusk, he took Willa down to the long border, and he finally told her the one true thing he had never said out loud. "I made this," he said, "all of it, before you were even born. Your mother used to sit right there on that bench while I dug. She named half these beds herself." Willa looked at the garden with brand-new eyes, the way a person looks at a familiar face the moment they learn it belongs to their own family. "So, Mom's in the flowers?" she asked. "In every spring one," Silas said, and his voice held steady. "The snapdragons especially." "Those were always hers?" Willa nodded, satisfied, and filed it away with the other true and permanent things she knew, and reached up and took his hand, and the two of them walked the length of the border in the failing gold light, while Silas watered it by hand from the old brass can, the way he always had, the way no drip line in the world had ever quite managed to do right. Helena found him on the bench a few weeks later, in the gray of another ordinary morning, 2 coffees steaming between them. "I said it in front of everyone," she said, watching the pairs along the wall, "that you were the lucky woman's, that you were mine. I said it before I had any right to." She turned the paper cup slowly in her hands. "I would like it to be true, in front of just the 2 of us, where it actually counts, where there is nobody standing around to be impressed by any of it." "It has been true for a while now," Silas said. "I was only waiting for the coffee to be warm enough to say so out loud." She laughed, that same startled laugh from the very first cold morning, and leaned her shoulder into his, and neither of them was in any hurry at all, because the entire point of the garden, the thing it had been quietly teaching them both, was that the good and lasting things flatly refused to be rushed. The foundation asked him, that autumn, to design the healing gardens for the new children's ward. Small green rooms outside the hospital windows, for kids who could not yet be taken outside themselves. He said yes, on his own terms, drawn and built with his own hands, and Willa promptly appointed herself his chief assistant and got directly in the way of everything and improved every single part of it anyway. A new bed went in outside a fourth-floor window that winter, drawn in a careful hand that a certain retired architect would have recognized anywhere on Earth. They came back to the garden on the mornings they could manage it, the three of them now, 3 coffees cooling on the bench, one of them mostly milk. Neither of them had gone out looking for any of this. He had only been keeping something alive for a small girl who missed her mother. She had only been searching for one honest place in her whole, crowded life where she could sit down and breathe. The garden had been telling the plain truth the entire time, in the only language it had ever had. It simply took the right morning and the right 2 people sitting still enough to notice before anyone finally learned how to read it. And in the second week of April, a full season late and yet exactly on time, the Snapdragons opened.